Welcome back to Getting Lost with myself, Gooder, and my good friend.
Dan, who is doing a Lost type thing.
Yeah, for those who've not picked up on it, type thing is Dan's keyword. But what does it mean? What is it connected
What
to?
does it mean? You've got to count the number in every episode, and then you take those numbers, and then you'll decipher a secret code.
Oh, we should do our own mysteries. I love it. Okay, so we're on to I think episode 13, which is Hearts and Minds.
Yep.
I think this is a bit of a weird one, personally.
Weird in what way?
I
Because
think.
I also think it's weird, but in a very specific way.
All right, okay. It The stuff with Shannon and Boone is quite odd, and I think it makes them different from every other character on the show, and I'll explain why in a minute.
Okay.
Uh, Locke behaves quite bizarrely in a lot of it. It actually throws in something that's huge, but then kind of hides it under the fact that it could have been like a drug-induced vision of
Okay. Right. Yeah.
that turns out not to be. And then yeah, just the other kind of bits and pieces happening in and around like the main plot of the episode are all a bit kind of random this week.
Yeah. So the reason why I thought it was odd was usually when we do this, your first question is like, "How did you rate the episode?" type thing. Almost said it. It's how do you rate the episode? And I struggled on this one to decide what I thought about the episode because, on one hand, I could very easily say this was a really weak episode that didn't hold my interest. And on the other hand, I could say, oh, this actually had a lot of really interesting things in it.
Yeah,
And the issue was we've got kind of usually defined episodes as having an A plot, a B plot, and then some subplots. And the A plot is whatever the lead character is doing on the island. The
yeah,
B plot is whatever the lead character's flashbacks are all about. And then there's stuff that goes on around it. And from my point of view, the A plot and the B plot were just boring and uninteresting.
yeah.
All the stuff going on around it was really quite good. So, how you rate an episode based on that, given that you sort of gone, well, the core components of it weren't great, but there's a lot of things going on in the sort of sidelines that was actually really interesting. So that's why I thought it was a bit weird. And you did also have like a bit of characterization that didn't quite seem to fit with the characters at the time, particularly about Locke. Like he was quite different, I thought, this episode to what we've seen of him previously.
Yes, he gets this episode. He's much more. It's hard to describe it, but he's much more kind of bought into this island is magical, mystical. I'm almost kind of like a sensei type figure for Boone, and I'm teaching him lessons in obscure ways.
Yeah, and while that was really interesting, it sort of introduced a side of him that you didn't really know about, and it moved him from just being a sort of outdoorsy hunter type person to something else that almost felt, wouldn't be out of place as if it was like a Native American Indian type thing going on. And so it asks a couple of questions in terms of like, how does he know how to make this magical paste of hallucinogenic stuff type thing? There we go again. There's another one. How does he know how to make that hallucinogenic paste? And he clearly knew where he was going with it sort of early in the episode, even before we had the actual direct confrontation with Boone.
Yeah. I think the other interesting thing I think that kind of brings out a different side to Locke, which is almost quite a scary one, is I think fairly early on they're talking, because they're talking about Saeed, because Boone's like, I don't like Saeed moving in,
Yeah,
with Shannon. And Locke says, "Oh, don't make an enemy of Saeed. He knows how to do a lot. He's useful," basically.
yeah, and he very specifically says we want him on our side.
Yeah,
implying that he has already decided there is going to be two sides within the group in some way, and his actions therefore have this context of, yes, he's helping Boone, but he's presumably helping Boone because he wants Boone on his side, and he's also using it to further the aim of he doesn't want Boone and Saeed fighting. So you've got a lot of sort of undertones in terms of his actions that come out of this one.
Yeah, it's all a bit quite strange. And I think it was quite interesting as well that there's a bit where Kate is a bit sus about Locke. She's a bit like, oh, he's a bit dodgy in it at one point. And I think she's the only person who's really kind of expressed that so strongly. Like a few other people are like, oh, Locke's a bit weird.
Yeah, I mean, Hurley, I think, is the only other one who potentially has at some point, can't remember if it was in this episode or some point previously, where I think he makes the point of, why has this guy got 20 knives in his bag?
Yeah.
Yeah. Somewhat, I think it was Hurley who sort of made that point where, and that's a fair enough thing that when he's introduced in, was it episode 4 or 5, where the Locke episode, where he sort of throws a knife and reveals all his knives and all that sort of thing. You should be a bit cautious about this guy because he doesn't seem like a normal person.
The thing that I find weird about, or thing that I think is different about this episode, because Shannon and Boone are kind of like the focus of the flashbacks, primarily Boone. And I think what's so interesting is so far, like for all the other characters, pretty much, their flashbacks have made sure that we know that they're either, just good people at heart, or they're showing some kind of like possibility for redemption in them.
Yeah.
So like also like Jack's just a good doctor person. Kate, she's a criminal, but we see her like save the farmer that dobbed her in. Like even Sawyer kind of backs down from scamming that family when he sees there's a child involved. So they all have this kind of thing. But like Shannon and Boone, there's no like redemptive quality in their flashbacks. They're just awful people. Basically, like Boone basically clearly has a history of buying off like Shannon's boyfriends and partners because he's in love with her, even though they're step siblings.
Yeah.
He clearly just goes around like manipulating people and living off basically men, as far as you can tell. She was clearly quite prepared to take like $50,000 from Boone and like took him out of it until her rubbish boyfriend left her. And then even in that kind of end sequence in the flashbacks, she's clearly just like kind of manipulating Boone and the way he feels for her. So like there's nothing in any of that that makes you think, oh, there's something about these people that is.
Yeah, I mean, what it does do, and I think I've talked about this before, is that there seems to be a recurring theme of the idea of redemption and potentially redemption on the island. Like the island is given the opportunity for the redemption. And in this case, it's not established in the flashbacks that there's any route to redemption. But instead, the flashbacks, you get Boone's problem. You go through this sequence where initially it's he's an overprotective brother and not really looking out for his sister. And then it becomes this additional thing. And then Locke effectively forces him through the whole process of the B plot. And it ends with, I gave you this experience because you needed it to survive. And effectively that experience is getting over Shannon. So it's weird because it's literally sort of, here's the problem and it's solved in the same episode.
So I think if in my book, Shannon is still ahead of Boone in terms of likability, I think.
Well, Boone, I think the thing about Boone is he's not demonstrated any skills that are in any way useful at any point.
No.
Shannon at least can speak French, which,
Boone's just got the lifeguarding, which he sucks at, apparently.
Yeah. And apparently can play tennis. Yeah, we learned that.
Yeah,
so,
we learned the big thing, so.
Yeah. And part of the problem I certainly had with the episode is that I didn't buy into the B plot switcheroo, the whole. Yeah, I kind of got it was a hallucination. Pretty much. It was like, okay, well, I've seen the paste thing. I put 2 and 2 together, and Locke very specifically sort of presents it as this is when you're sufficiently motivated, and the fact then Shannon appears and you're having all these flashbacks. So because I didn't even get like the payoff of that
going,
yeah, I was like, oh, she's dead, is she? Don't think so. And then oh, she's back alive again. So
there's also, I think there's a visual clue as well, because when Shannon appears in those sequences, there's just something about the way that she's dressed that makes you think this is not.
And I couldn't quite place what it was, but I think there were, like, when I watched it the second time, I was trying to pick up on that, and I was like, no, she just seems like too clean, or something. There was something about it.
Like, I wondered, because I've only watched it once, like during this. I wondered if it might be her hair. I think the imaginary Shannon's hair is a bit longer and it's tied up.
Right.
At points. It might not be that, but I think that's one of the things.
Yeah, there was definitely something that felt off, and I think because I'd seen Locke do the paste thing, and it was like, oh yeah, if it gets infected out here, that just seemed completely, that's just a made up thing that's going on there, and that's probably why both A and B plot just felt a bit weak, because I didn't really care about Boone beforehand. I didn't care about Boone by the end of the episode.
Yeah.
I mean, he's become a bit more of a reliable Locke lackey, but that's all I've really got from it so far.
He's been promoted from boring character to Locke lackey. It's not a great move, is it? But what I think is quite fun, or quite funny, really, is this like a huge thing for the show as a whole in those like drug-induced sequences of Boone, but they kind of make out like, because you kind of, there's the thing about it, or it's all because of this paste, like they kind of hide it, because for a very brief, I don't know if you've spotted it, but there's a very brief moment where you get the audience's first clear view of what turns out to be the thing in the jungle.
Yeah, and you get a shot of it, but again, because it's a hallucination, and because I knew it was a hallucination, I was just like, this is probably just what Boone thinks the monster is type. So yeah, it's like, and what will be interesting is to see if that actually ultimately it turns out to be what the monster is, because then that adds a whole extra level to it. But yeah, in terms of my viewing of it, because I wasn't buying into that, I just kind of dismissed that bit as well. I think I don't want to be too down on the episode, because I think there's some really good bits in the episode. I think the stuff with Locke is interesting, even if it does seem slightly out of character to what we've seen so far. But the undertones of him sort of setting out his group, I think the stuff where with the hatch, as we've now discovered it is, that must go somewhere, and you're like, where does that
go? I guess that's one of the things that I kind of, I guess, slightly forget, because as soon as they kind of find, like before, as soon as they found this piece of metal, like I know what that is. Right. I think thinking about it now, this is probably the first episode where you clearly see.
Yeah, this is the first episode where I realised, they've discovered an entrance hatch. I thought they'd discovered something like underground, but the fact it's obviously an entrance, and there was this whole nice little interaction with Locke, where he's kind of just looking at it, sort of trying to figure out how do we get in it, and he makes does the Michelangelo story about how Michelangelo spent months before he carved the statue of David type. So I think it's an interesting comparison, because I think that if you like, it's like the angel in the rock, I think is how Michelangelo described it. So again, there's a sort of biblical link to something going on there.
I guess, and there are sort of other bits of the episode, you get a few interesting bits and some nice little bits. So you get there's the thing about the compass.
Yes, because that's interesting on a few different levels. So that's the bit where
so he's looking at his maps, trying to work them out, the maps from Rousseau, and then Locke comes along and they have a little bit of a kind of interaction, and then Locke gives Syed his compass, and then later on Syed's talking to Jack and he's like, look, this compass doesn't line up with
Yeah, and you sort of you're thinking, okay, is there a logical explanation for that? Like there's something big magnetic on the island itself. Is the island somewhere where they don't, somewhere else which they don't think it is? Although, is it just the island being additionally weird and there's something more supernatural going on there? But I also like the fact that like Locke, when he gives up the compass, specifically says, "I don't need it anymore."
Yeah,
implying that he now knows his way around the island so well. And you kind of think as well that Locke has probably already figured out the magnetic bit, because if you're an outdoorsy type person, you know how to use the sun as to navigate, and if he's been using the compass to navigate,
it's the two same things, isn't it? It's he either says that because he doesn't need it anymore and he knows his way around, or he says that because he knows it doesn't work.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting to see because it's still potentially useful if it's pointing toward in a consistent
direction.
And there's a whole load of like really nice bits. Like I really like the bit about the garden.
I was just going to say, like, Sun's garden that she's set up also gives you that kind of moment where Kate realizes that she understands English.
Yep. And so we've expanded the list of people who now know that she speaks English from Michael to Kate.
I think one of the other comments I made, or notes I made about that, I think comes when Hurley's talking about his digestive issues.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And he lists off like all the fruit. And I was like, that's an impressive range and variety of fruit that they found within presumably walking distance of their two camps.
Yeah. And I think there was, might be an earlier episode where Kate says, we're having to go further afield to get the fruit now because we picked it all dry in the nearby area. And I think it's an important element again, where you've possibly got the two groups sort of forming, where you've got the group A who's predominantly in the caves and is we're staying on the island for the foreseeable future, we're trying to make life as comfortable as possible, and the group B who are sort of still on the beach and hoping for rescue. And this is very much building even more infrastructure than what they'd been doing previously in terms of we're now going to start farming and make life, all this sort of thing.
But it does. You do wonder slightly. I guess it must have been a hobby for Sun, because she was, the socialite daughter of a crime boss. So it's interesting that she knows how to do.
Because both her and Jin, both Sun and Jin have sort of demonstrated knowledge of like sea creatures and using them in food and based bits and pieces. So there's clearly something there. But I think I also liked the fact that Kate keeps the secret, and the sort of the rationale behind it is sort of fairly simply stated by Sun as it being, you lie for love.
Yeah.
And Kate immediately kind of resonated with that one. So I think that sort of added an extra bit where you go, okay. So we know that Kate killed the man she loved or something.
Yes.
And like, does this link into that in terms of lying to protect a relationship or something along those lines? So again, it sort of added an extra little dimension to the Kate backstory that we're yet to fully discover. Yeah. But the fact that she sort of made that connection with Sun and was quite receptive to that argument.
And I think the other thing you have, isn't it, is the box that Michael has that he's looking in, that you don't initially see what he's got in the box because he's found his luggage.
Yeah.
Though for Lost, that turns out to be a relatively short mystery and is relatively quickly. But at this point, you don't know what was in it.
You also have the Hurley trying to catch a fish, which was,
the little comedy aside bit with Hurley and Jin and the fish and the urchin.
Yep.
And the pee on my foot.
Pee on my foot.
And we find out that Jin at least knows no in English.
Yeah, and you'd expect that, but I do wonder if the pee on my foot thing purely stems from people having watched Friends, or if they're, you know.
Yeah, I think a lot of it does, because it's not right, is it? I'm sure it's not an actual.
I don't know, but you know, it definitely, like, whenever I hear that, I assume it's come from that episode of Friends. But then,
Probably.
but yeah, that was quite fun. It was nice that you know, Hurley and Jin clearly buried the hatchet, which was another thing. Even though I'm not convinced there was much of a hatchet to bury, but Hurley, because I think Hurley made a bigger deal out of it than was actually.
Yeah, I think, and it's another bit, isn't it, of Jin slowly trying to kind of connect with other people, because in the at the start of the season, he's very much, we're going to stay separate, we're going to do our own thing.
Yeah. There's also like quite a few bits that went on with Locke outside of the looking at the hatch and the setting up.
Yeah, outside of
he kind of like almost wanders between characters for like the rest of the episode, or characters wander to him. So like there's an interaction sort of with him and Jack. There's an interaction, I think, with a couple of the other characters where he's doing his sort of mysterious staring out to sea while the carnage that he's set in motion is going on in the forest, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think the one that I thought odd, I guess, is the Locke and Jack interaction. What I thought was strange for Locke is he says he's not seen Boone all day.
Yeah.
And he's told, I think Saeed, that Boone said to him, take the afternoon off or something.
Yeah.
So he's like telling people different things. And to me, for Locke, that doesn't make sense. Locke seems like the type of person who would come up with a lie
story,
and stick to it. So that just felt a bit strange. Like, why would he tell different people different stuff?
And the other bit that I recall, and this wasn't, Locke wasn't there for it because this was actually a Jack Charlie interaction, is you get talking about Locke and Charlie basically saying, if there's one person I trust with my life, it would be John.
Yeah, Charlie's like, that guy's crazy, but he's going to save me.
Yeah. And that's interesting because what we've seen in this episode is kind of this idea that maybe there's this building up a team, building up people on his side, and you therefore have this sort of that episode a few episodes back where he basically helps Charlie come into his own is very similar to what he's doing with Boone this time round. There was a nice little point that almost sort of showed, this is the end result of sort of Locke's, not manipulation, or Locke's helping of people.
I guess, it makes more sense now I'm thinking about it. It makes more sense of the episode title for this one. So Hearts and Minds. So Locke is out for the hearts and minds of the people.
Yes, because I think initially I was like, I don't know why it's called Hearts and Minds. Like, what's the connection there? But it clearly must be to do with what Locke's doing in this episode, because I can't really see any other reason for the episode title apart from the stuff Locke's doing, because none of the sort of A or B plot really comes into that. I mean, you've got the notion that Boone's in love with his sister or stepsister, but didn't really fit. So I think going back to what we said at the beginning, it's a bit of a weird episode because you've got this, I'm not interested in this plot. I'm not interested in this plot. But actually, maybe it's not those plot lines that's actually the underlying thing that's going on.
Yes, yeah. Possibly one that fits into the bigger picture.
Yeah.
But not doesn't work so well as an individual episode, which I guess, to be fair, 13 episodes in.
Yeah, and I think really, it's always going to be difficult when you've got an episode that's focused on a character that so far you've portrayed as massively incompetent and not really
massively lame and boring.
You can't really see many audience members being particularly invested in Boone, by this episode, and so, but you kind of need to tell the backstory in some way, shape, or form, and it does that, and it adds the extra element that I guess makes him a slightly better character, in that it's not just being an overly over the top Big Brother type thing.
Yeah.
It's way more nuance than that, and something that you can move on from, I guess, which is what this episode's all kind of about. So you're potentially setting the scene of, oh, this character's going to get better now. But he's going to be more useful. And
so any other final thoughts on this one?
let's just have a quick. I think that's covered all the bits. I did note down that Locke did knock Boone out very efficiently, and that. And so, again, going back to the mystery of who knocked out Saeed, it's like, he did that pretty well.
Still not ruled him out. Like, you still, like, I guess now your main suspects are basically whittled down to, I would say, Locke or Ethan.
Yeah, because now you've got the second suspect of Ethan, and potentially whoever Ethan's group is, if there's more of them, which you assume there is if he was going off somewhere. And the only other thing I think that's kind of worth mentioning is just that yet again in the flashbacks we have a connection to other characters.
Because there's one. Sawyer, like in the police station, isn't he?
Yeah, and given that not a huge amount of time passes, I was like, oh, okay, we've seen Sawyer arrested in a police station, and yet somehow very shortly after that he ends up on a plane, going back to Los Angeles. So you kind of think, oh, okay. Because my assumption is that interaction has taken place after when he's walked away from the deal.
Yeah, I think
we don't know what the timeline is on that. That could have been months or years.
Yeah, I think that's quite a gap, because I think the scam that he's running when we have his flashbacks, I think that's in the States, isn't it?
I think so. Yeah, I wasn't 100% sure because everyone seems to be American, but it could have been. But it's definitely moved him to Australia, so we've seen that he is actually definitively in Australia, but we don't know what he was being arrested for, or how he gets from being in that police station to on the plane. And I guess the only other thing, actually, building up my big set of mysteries, is that I'm pretty sure that again Shannon's on the plane, on that specific plane, because of Boone, because it's Boone who buys the tickets. There was something about that. There was definitely something in terms of why they end up on that exact plane, but I can't quite remember how it panned out. But I just sort of clocked it. But it's been a while since I've seen it now.
Yeah, I think Boone arrives with tickets to fly back. Does he? I can't remember.
Yeah, I can't quite remember, but there is definitely, again, a little bit there in terms of why people are on the plane or how they end up on the plane.
Cool. So that was episode 13, Hearts and Minds. Join us next time for some Walt action.
And Michael. Don't forget Michael.
Oh, and Michael. Yeah. But, Walt's the interesting bit, isn't he? Join in with your thoughts in the comments below.